For the first time, when Steve Jobs announced the iPad to the world, he did not emphasize its smooth scrolling or mobile internet unlike the first iPhone. Instead, our focus was tunneled to its price.
Not at $9.99, but at just $499.
What Jobs did was to fix our brain, or shall I say, anchor it onto the first piece of information. We were forced to look back at the $999 price tag and compare it with the new one, which is of $499. Within seconds, the iPad started to look cheap and the best deal on earth. This raises the question, are we really bothered about affordability, or simply buy things comparing it with similar products or products from other brands? You may be shocked, but it is the latter that aligns more closely with our inherent nature. Our inclination to latch onto the initial piece of information and subsequently compare it with later pieces is how we gauge value. In fact, it is the same reason people prefer certain items in restaurants, buy the standard or best value subscription, and prosecute convicts to harsher punishments undeservingly. This reason is what we call as anchoring bias. Anchoring bias is a cognitive bias that causes us to rely heavily on the first piece of information to draw conclusions about a topic. The idea of anchoring was first mentioned in 1958 as a part of studies in psychophysics. This study was later succeeded by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky as they proposed the anchor-adjust hypothesis, which basically says that humans start with an initial idea or value about a topic and then adjust their belief according to the starting point. If it is true, it demands the obvious question: how does our brain bury our perception to the first impression and create a deceiving picture of value or gain? This is what we aim to explore in this video. We are going to peel the layers of anchoring bias and lay them exposed. Going back to the iPad example, many of you may think that the anchoring bias is happening because of the power of the brand. However, in reality, we indulge in anchoring bias even when we buy something at our local restaurants or eateries. It is for the same reason restaurants keep their best-selling items hemmed between pricier options. Their bestsellers give them rave reviews, earns repeat customers, and also helps them save money by cutting down inventory. But do not think that price anchors are so simplistic. They are far complex than placing a cheaper option beside a pricier one. It is because our brain can create anchors in multiple other ways. When it comes to numbers, our brain does not only pick up the entire number at once, but it also gets influenced by the value of the first digit of the number. Larger the first digit, more expensive is the perception. Does not matter if it's just 1 cent less, the effect is powerful enough to generate mass level irrationality. This is demonstrated by a study from the Ohio University. The study showed that only 29 out of 100 people bought a larger coffee priced at $1.20 against the smaller one priced at 95 cents. But as soon as they increased the price by 5 cents for both coffees, people choosing the larger option jumped to 56, all because the first number for both options became same. Customers now anchored themselves to the first digit of the price and got the best deal overall, or at least how they perceived it. This also goes on to show that anchors are not seen in silos by our brain. Instead, it goes beyond just comparing two numbers. It can look at the order of digits, past knowledge, and even uses some level of reasoning to form an anchor, irrespective if the final decision is totally rational or not. Seems like it is simply ingrained in our nature, so much so that our brains do something similar in our dreams as well. It glues together the random visuals and makes something meaningful out of them. While a dream may have a weird story, you can tell that the brain has patched them from our experience that is anchored deep within our subconscious. A similar scenario is masterfully shown in the movie Inception and its portrayal of Cillian Murphy as Robert Fisher. in the midst of coping with his father's terminal illness, it is somewhat implied that Fisher is suspicious of his uncle's intentions of possibly wanting to seize his inheritance. Leonardo, or Cobb, being aware of this fact, decides to use it as the anchor. He kidnaps Fisher in the first level of dream and forces him to come up with a random number while hiding his identity. In the second level of dream, Cobb, or Leo's character, acting as Mr. Charles, convinces him that Fisher is kidnapped and someone wanted to extract a number from his mind and he's here to help him.
Breathe, remember your training, accept the fact that you're in a dream and I'm here to protect you.
Fisher remembers that faintly, and this is where the anchor starts to gain strength. Cobb then takes him to one of the rooms in the hotel and discovers a dream-sharing machine that convinces Fisher that it was placed by his uncle and that the kidnappers were working for him. The anchor became even stronger now. Fisher is almost convinced that his uncle is indeed the villain. But it wasn't until the moment his uncle was caught entering the room with the keys, the anchor is strengthened to a point where he fully laid his faith on Leonardo's character. Cobb orchestrated the supporting facts that Fisher could not help but integrate. Our lives, being no different, are also filled with strategically placed anchors by outside sources. However, these anchors need not be placed externally by businesses or advertisers every time, because many times we create them on our own. If I ask you, is the length of Mississippi River longer or shorter than 3,000 miles? You are likely to picture the US map across the north-south extension. But if I change the distance to 300 miles instead of 3,000, you might picture the length of the highway running across Missouri. The distance in the question, along with the mental image of the river, generates your anchor. We follow a similar pattern when it comes to our political beliefs as well. For example, a photo showing a politician shaking hands with a controversial figure has the power to influence or reinforce your belief about that person. If you always dislike the politician, it will act as an anchor to further solidify your perception on seeing that picture. Opponents can then release more propaganda and keep hammering the same perception again and again. You can see that lack of knowledge or even limited knowledge, pre-existing opinions based on favoritism can greatly contribute to self-generated anchoring bias. But the rabbit hole of first impression goes beyond internal or external anchors. You don't need either of them because our brain does that inherently even when provided with two totally unrelated pieces of information, with the first being the anchor. This shocker was revealed in a study in which a bunch of participants were asked for the last two digits of their social security number and then presented with various products with individual price tags. Individuals having a higher value for the last two digits of their SSN were ready to pay more compared to the ones with lower value. This phenomenon underscores how pervasive anchoring bias really is, and the fact that our brains may not even need a rationale such as profit or gain to slip into this deception. It may seem very uncanny, but this is what makes anchoring bias highly unavoidable. This brings us to this inevitable question: how do we evade this bias? The answer is, it is not entirely possible. In fact, anchoring bias is so pervasive that it doesn't even spare judges in the courtroom, who may award a severe or milder punishment based on the degree of influence on their judgments by prosecutors. Our brain simply cannot help itself from connecting the initial pieces of information to the next piece and then to the next. And the only way it does that is by connecting the dots looking backwards. It is how the brain seems to work, and perhaps this is what great storytellers tend to exploit, be it politicians, advertisers, marketers, manipulative spouses, or storytellers themselves. However, despite the inherent deception, a bit of self-introspection can actually help. Upon the first impression, you should ask yourself why the initial figure, number, or fact is not justified. Develop a counter-narrative. That way, we take a more rational approach that either validates or rejects the first impression, or at least makes it more rational. But are we going to do that as an obligation all the time? Maybe if our professions require us to do so, we will. But more often than not, it is easier to put our guards down. We let the first impression dictate our judgment and plant a flawed narrative. And as long as it brings contentment to our brains, we may continue to engage in this comfortable self-deception and perpetually shape our perceptions based on initial impressions alone.